Ocean Hills at its best is when we are in it together.
Even though you may want to be munching and sitting at the table, that you can kind of feel like you can make eye contact with each other and all see me, so that we don't, feel too isolated here. And if you need to move at any point to obtain that perspective, I hope that works for you. I want to I want to start by first thanking you for having me so much here, and I appreciate that all of you spend some of your busy time. I know that obviously you have a lot with your kids and your lives and everything, so it's truly, I appreciate that you have come here to hear me. And I know that there are people here from different arenas where I've met you or seen you. My son is a good friend of Jono's son at Peabody School, so there's been already some cross-pollination and thinking about how maybe some of you might have met me before. But I want to say a couple things kind of as backdrop, or several things as backdrop. The first is I work in a private practice of clinical psychology. I also do consultations with the schools, both private and public schools, in terms of kids who have different areas of developmental or emotional or learning needs. And one of the focuses of my practice, or the primary focus of my practice, is not just related to things like family dynamics or marital concerns or those kind of things, but how to understand for your individual child, for your unique child, with their temperamental style, with their learning style, how to best create an environment which promotes their most successful development. There's a saying sometimes, as I get into talking about the trickiness of parenting, that your child is kind of like a cruise ship going in its direction, and that direction may be partly driven by who they are, their temperament, their style, and that could include things like my older son, who was extremely colicky and an extremely hard time learning to go to sleep. And that at that point there's this both realization that is both empowering as well as humbling, which is that you are the tiny tugboat. You're only the little piece which gradually guides them in the direction that you're hoping. It doesn't happen all at once. We can't just on a dime change the cruise ship around, but with that application of the tugboat in a sort of steady fashion, you can help them find open water. And all of that goes to how we as parents have to start with the idea that there is imperfection built into the system, that we are, none of us obviously perfect as parents, and that there are many moments where we find that things don't go right. We have glitches in plans. We have kids who, even in the most ideal setting and in our most patient and steady way, may not follow what we ask them to do, and for whom there are all sorts of factors that may impact on what's happening at that day, that moment, that stage of their life. So all of this makes us realize that there are many layers of imperfection that go into being a parent and raising a child successfully. That doesn't mean that you're powerless. All that means is that there's a certain amount of randomness in the system built in, and we have to do the best we can. The second part about, let me say, first, that parenting, sometimes people have talked about as a combination of two basic things. One is this, and one is this. In other words, it's helping us with nurturing our children, making them feel better, helping them cope with a complex world of challenges from other people, as well as things that we have to do to help them mature, to know ways that are appropriate to behave, to try hard, to keep on learning even though they're frustrated. Things where there is that tugboat application of guidance to move them in the right direction. And that all of that becomes a piece of choices that we have to make. And I'll give you just some examples of this. That in infancy we have all these, so much of the literature out there about what one should do in this situation, that situation. But we have to make choices. Do we let our infant be held for as long as they need, quote unquote? Or is it sometimes time for them to be put down, even if it isn't that they are fully calm? How can they learn to pause and self-regulate on their own? When do you do that? How much do you do that? That could be in terms of things like even toilet training. How much do we wait and say, it's up to them, it's their time, versus how much do we say, okay, now maybe it's time. It's time for us to try. And so these choices that go into when we nurture and when we give that guidance and that push become important. And there's another piece of this that I want to talk about that's based around a story. It's sort of a little clinical story or parable, it might be, that is more applied to dads than moms, but I think you can. It's pretty universal, some of the thinking to do with this story. And it's a story of a man who grew up in a household where his father was very much a miser. He didn't like to spend any money. He didn't like to give the kids anything. He said no to every toy. He was tough about everything. He was always worried about money. And the son grew up thinking, you know, I'm going to be different when I get older. And he goes out and he does well in college and he works hard and he makes a lot of money. And he does it for good reasons. He doesn't do it just because he's greedy. He does it because he wants to give to his family. He wants to be able to give the gifts that he never received as a child. So he goes and he works tremendously hard and he gives the kids vacations and skis and Legos and all the things that they want. And he's coming home from the biggest business deal of his life. He's, say, 45 years old. And he's going to be able to say to his wife, this is it. I really made it. I'm here. I did it. I'm able to do and give to you what I can. And he comes home, and his wife is packing her bags. And he says, what's going on? This is it. And she says, you've been such a miser with your time that we have not known you, right? So that in all his efforts to overcome his own past, to try to be a different parent than who his father was, he ended up in partly the same cycle. And I only talk about that to emphasize that it is always tricky for us to know how we make choices in terms of when to push and when to nurture. It doesn't mean that we're out of control, but that we have to have moments of pause and reflection. That what we see as certain or the only way to go we need to think about, have lots of different perspectives on, take in different ideas, and try and do the best we can under those circumstances. Now, one of the things to just give as a sort of side note before I talk about, or another side note before I talk about what's called positive behavior support, is the idea of whether or not we should be quote-unquote permissive parents or authoritarian parents. There's a description of these two styles of parenting, one of which some people talk about attachment parenting, which is an idea that comes around providing a child with lots of nurturing, lots of holding, lots of caring. And then authoritarian parent, which is at the opposite end, which has lots of rules, lots of structure, lots of rigidity. And that we, in both of those we can obviously find extremes. We can find times when a child does not have enough guidance in their development, or times where a child only experiences pushing but never experiences holding. Right? So with that being said, I want to emphasize a set of things that people talk about in terms of what's known as positive behavior support. Also, some people just call this pragmatic parenting on some level, which has the goal being to have a child feel both cared for, but also have a successful ability to move through your own and your family's day, as well as your child's ability to move through and master developmental tasks that they need to acquire and learn and build. So that when we talk about this, the idea is that children need to accomplish tasks as they move forward. They need to be able to tie their shoes at some point. They need to learn skills about cleaning their room. They need to learn what to predict about their day so that if it is after their meal, that there will be a light that goes on, that it's time to brush their teeth at some point. So that when they get to be at that sleepover when they're 7 years old or 8 years old or whatever, that even if they aren't reminded to brush their teeth, aha, there's a light that will come on, that this is my task now, that I need to be an independent child, a successful person in the world who can then feel comfortable guiding themselves through their day. That in psychology we talk about this as the process of an internalization. We take the structures from outside, the things that our parents do for us, the schedules that are set up for us, and gradually begin to make them our own so that we can then make choices throughout our young life and that will lead to our whole lives. Choices like, is it a good idea to get a good sleep, and how much sleep do we need, and be able to regulate those choices amidst lots of competing goals and experiences of their day. So this idea of positive behavior support is one of the most important things, is the goal towards that successful task completion. Right? Which means that children need to be able to complete tasks. They need to be, throughout their academic life, throughout their work life in the future, throughout their daily life, they need to be able to build experiences of mastery that include self-assurance, that include an ability to guide themselves through the task. And all of those things are goals that can be helpful not only to their development, but to your family's stress and experiences in your household. And the reason I bring that back to the stress picture is because when I was asked about what would be the question for today, I brought up stress mainly because in my experience. Oh, let me just ask everyone. Did you have any thoughts about that? About what tend to be the most stressful moments of the day, especially to do with parenting? Anyone feel bold enough to bring up one or two?
Our table said homework.
Homework,
Sibling
yeah.
rivalry.
Sibling rivalry.
Trying to get out of the house.
Got you. Good one. Yeah, I like that.
I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of different.
Yeah, trying to get out of the house.
No, they were saying that one was saying, I'm tired of repeating myself.
Right.
Say the first time.
Right. How to improve the efficiency of some of those things. Right. And sibling one is we have to, there's some special tricks and ideas to do with sibling ones. But anything else that you want to come back?
I think our table was that dinner hour, that 5 to 7, trying to get.
With probably multiple things going on during that time. What the kids need to do, what you need to do, what the whole family is trying to accomplish. Right. Okay.
And being tired.
And being tired, yes. So that for, hopefully I can weave those things in, but please remind me if there's something that you want me to address specifically. We can go back into that. But one of the things that our goal would be is to help our children build up over time, the way the cruise ship gets pulled by the tugboat, the ability to respond the first time to when you ask things, the ability to more independently get their homework done, and the ability to master their own needs in a way that doesn't require as much time or intervention on your part. Now, there are really 4 things I want to emphasize in terms of this positive behavior support. And we can, I have I have a sheet that can provide some summary of this afterwards for everybody. Was that me? Did I quack? And so I'll hand this out at the end, but I actually don't want to hand it out now because I find that everybody will look at that and then we'll get stuck on one piece or another. But just to let you know that I do have this written down and can share it. The first part of that I want to talk about is in the area of increasing positive emotions and interactions. And really the goal at the outset of starting any new idea in parenting or any new program or any new way of approaching your kids, or even, it should be done anyway, I think it's one of the prerequisites to parenting, is finding ways that create positive emotions and interactions within your home. And that this is really the groundwork or the bedrock for the more specifics. This is the support that goes beyond technique. And there's a program that helps families who have some complex situations, some of them high-risk situations, or some complicated family issues or problems, sometimes socioeconomic issues, sometimes other issues. That's called Parent-Child Interaction Training. It's known as PCIT. And why I'm bringing it up is not to say I think you should look it up. It's a really specific, very specific program. But the founders of this program really realized something, that no matter what we do as far as behavior, we need to have a positive bedrock of interaction time and good feelings within our homes. And that one of the things that they recommend is a special time that occurs with your child, that occurs around non-directed time. So that during at least 10 minutes every day, you find a time to basically play with your child. And that play is not so much devoted towards helping the child learn something or helping the child accomplish a task. And it isn't even directed time, meaning it isn't directing your child to play something, but just playing with your child. And in fact, one of the recommendations of this is that playtime be something where you don't even ask too many questions or comment too much. You don't talk too much. You focus mainly on just enjoying yourself with your child. And that bedrock of time where you have a goal to have positive interactions with your child and just have them enjoy your company is a way to learn about each other, a way to both of you self-regulate and relax. And all of that needs to occur even if a child is behaving badly or having a hard day. It is not something that you take away as punishment, because there's something that is essential about that nurture side that we don't want to bring into a kind of rewards and punishments or a kind of cycle of pulling back. And one of the comments the authors make is that sometimes when a child's had a hard day and a rough day, that's the most time they need it, not the least time they need it. Now, this could be something that it's something that dads can do too, obviously. And dads sometimes are good at this, actually, because they get playing sometimes because that's the way they are. So this is one piece of this first first picture of the puzzle. Some other pieces to do with this increasing positive emotions and interactions include increasing the amount of praise and recognition of positive traits or actions before beginning any new program or new plan or new goals for behavior. So that one of the things that people talk about is that ideally we should have at least a 3-to-1 ratio of how many things you notice that a child has done positively as opposed to the things they've done negatively. And this always trips me up. This is my personal thing that I will have to remind myself of consciously, because when my child does not clear their plate from the table, I will be much more likely to say, it's time to clear your plate. You didn't clear your plate. You need to clear your plate. Than if they cleared their plate, me saying, good job, you cleared your plate, right? It's so easy to forget that side. And that ongoing foundation of noticing the positives tends to make a lot of things much more effective that you do as a parent. And the joke about this is that you've got to catch them being good, right? You've got to have your eye out for, I'm going to catch them. I'm going to say, and it's not something that is even in a moment like, oh, they played a good soccer game. Well, that's a sort of orchestrated moment. Unfortunately, everyone is ready to say to their kids, good game. And it's not saying the little things where they notice that you're aware of them around the edges. They notice that you're aware of what you're doing. You're aware of what they're doing. Now, another piece of this is trying to help your child and yourself and your husband and everyone in the family to be more likely to use I statements. In other words, saying, I feel sad that you did that, or that was something that I had a hard time with. I'm having trouble with that, rather than saying that was you did that wrong. You didn't do that right. You should have done this. Why didn't you do that? What are other examples of that? Kids who say to each other, you're stupid. Obviously, we want to try and replace that with something by saying, I want you to leave my room, to say to your sibling, rather than you're stupid, or I hate you, or that kind of thing. So we're trying to help that child have a vocabulary that relies on talking about their own experience in a way that is not necessarily critical or hateful of another. It brings me back to our political discussion earlier. We were talking about the problem of hate in campaigns. So that when we demonize the other, that poisons the whole discourse, or makes all aspects of communication go downhill. Now, the last part of this in terms of positive emotions and interactions, and this is, some people accuse this of sounding sort of like the super nanny, but I think it is really important, is to have very clear and simple family rules that everyone needs to repeat. And those rules are talked about not so much at the time of misbehavior as other times. They're talked about as part of family get-together, as part of at the dinner table. What did that show that day about what's a good rule to have? And the main rules that I like to keep it simple are that nobody or nothing gets hurt. That means nothing in the house, not yourself, not me, meaning the parent, not the wall, not the toy. Nobody or nothing gets hurt. The second one is help others when they need help. When I have groceries and you could help me, that would be something I need. I'll help you when you really can't tie your shoe yet. I need to help you. When your sibling needs something, we like to help others when they need help. And the last is using polite and caring language. It's just specifically around words that help social dialogue and make the kind of lubrication of daily life by having those words that are polite and caring. And you can get a lot of mileage out of these 3 rules. They cover a lot of stuff. And it's a good idea, again, that this is something that kids should be able to repeat, that they should be able to say. If you say to them, what are some important rules? Obviously, you can change these or modify them or add to them as based on your values and your family. But that they should be simple enough and clear enough and repeated enough so that they aren't a punishment. They're just something that's like the constitution of your family. It's there, it's permanent, it won't go away, and you can help them refer back to it when necessary. Okay. Any thoughts about all that? Any questions? Yeah, sure.
I really like what you're saying. I think it's very helpful. I was thinking how good it would be too for husband and wife to be giving positive statements to each other. I think sometimes we neglect doing that. And that's a good model.
Catch them being good.
No kidding. And also, I thought to myself, it's really good if we could praise them for their personal characteristics, not just the things that they're doing, but just who they are as a person. Like maybe they have a great sense of humor, and you would be praising them. And just laugh when you say those things. You know, enjoy their personality too, not just what they're accomplishing.
Yeah, and overriding caring that you convey in that too. Right.
It's all part of enjoyment too.
Yeah,
We're saying enjoying.
Yeah. Now, the second part is under establishing routines, right? And here's where I think I get to be more of a tough guy than some people in the parenting world. And what I mean by tough guy, especially these next two areas, is that structure up front helps with caring on the back end, meaning that if we are upfront about what our expectations are, what our routines are, what our children need to do, what we need to do, that's very clear, that it is much easier to have a harmonious home where on the backside we have those moments of caring and praise, and we can connect, and that without that routine and that structure, we're often having to play catch up with the tough moments, with the stressful moments all the time. So one of the things is, just to get into the specifics here, that we let our kids know that during the school day, especially Monday through Thursday and into Friday morning, right, we have a clear structure to things that happen. What's going to happen when, that the kids know what's going to happen, that if there's any changes in routine, they get prompted about those changes, that overall that routine should include responsibilities before perks, so that this is if then. If we have our clothes on and our if it's appropriate for your child and your values to have them make their bed or do other small things that will help them get ready towards the morning, if that is done and they've eaten their breakfast and brushed their teeth, then they can play. They can have some playtime before school. And this is clearly expressed to them in these terms. It is, if that happens, then we can do this. And that they know that ahead of time. That's not something you surprise upon them every time they don't do those things. So you can't play because you didn't clean up is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about up front that routine and that structure are in place, and that they have heard that from you ahead of time of that moment, right? And that should not just be delivered at the moment of the upset, right? That's the thing that gets talked about, before, the night before, that, I was thinking about mornings and how everybody could have a happier time and you could get more playtime if we tried something, which is, if this happens, then we'd all have more time to play, or we'd have more time to feel relaxed. Those things are delivered in such a way so that for your child, given their age, they should have some understanding of what's to come. So if you have let's say, if you have a 3-year-old, we wouldn't expect them to know that at 7:42 is the time that you need to walk out the door. That this is too specific and too much. You might want to have your 10-year-old know that, however, that we can't get past this time on the clock, otherwise we'll be late to school. But for your 3-year-old, it may be helpful for them to know that what comes the first thing after eating comes brushing your teeth, or whatever it is that makes sense for your routine in your family, so that they would have that sense in their mind of what comes next. Some people talk about it's not, I don't love having lists in the sense of lists of things for a child to do, partly because for kids who tend to have a harder time getting things done during their morning, those very same kids really dislike lists. The kids who are kind of all over the place and relaxy, or high energy kids, or whatever their style is that makes it harder for them to get through the morning, they don't love to be sitting and, okay, I'm going to look and read this through. One other thing is to have a project with your child so that you take pictures of them during the day doing their different things. And this is especially good for the preschool set. They'll really enjoy having their picture taken while they're eating their breakfast and while they're doing this, and then putting them up in a board in order so that they could be part of making what their morning is. And if you say, I don't know what to do next, if they say, I don't know what to do next, you can say, look, what's this? And there's the picture of them putting on their shoes. And it's a little more graphic, it's a little bit more dynamic than just calling out from the other side of the house, get your shoes on. Now, at first, this takes more time, I realize. This takes an investment, doing these kinds of things, taking the pictures, putting it on the board. We're all so busy and all those kind of things. Hopefully, if you could get your child involved, it'll be a little less so. It'll be less just you having to do it. But by putting some of that time in, it can help them have a little better mindset about that what's to come. What's in the routine? How do I access that routine? How do they become more self-managing? And remember, I was talking about internalization before. This is what we call a transitional piece, right? We have the transition between you, who's creating the organization and the structure, and them, who's doing it all on their own. Hopefully when they're 18 and going off to college, they'll be able to walk right in and do these routines on their own. This is transitional kinds of tools where they can use something to do that. The other pieces about routines are obviously that, having eating and sleep routines to be similar. I'm a little bit of a sleep Nazi, as it's been called. I'm a big believer in sleep routines, not just because children have to have bedtime so that parents have their time or that kind of thing. It's because of our brains that when we have evenly spaced sleep times, our body has neurotransmitters that then fire at certain points to help us relax as we go into our evening, right? So that we know that our body clock is set like, oh, I'm headed towards my sleep time, and this is the time when I'm going to have this serotonin that's going to come in and help me get to sleep. And similarly in the morning, if we're waking up around the same time, that helps us have that burst of wake-up energy. And when we have our kids with lots of different schedules and different times, and they're up in the night and all those kind of things, transitioning them again gradually in the tugboat kind of fashion to a really clear sleep routine. And with young kids, I think that should be pretty much 7 days a week. You gradually let them have more latitude with this, but we don't have really late nights on Friday and Saturday night. It is not something that is highly conducive towards their ability to feel alert in the morning and ready for bed in the evening, right? So any thoughts about this, routines? And number two?
I
was gonna say, I think that's huge, because when my kids would go to sleepovers and they'd stay up late, and even when they were like 11 or 12 years old, and they'd stay up till 1 or 2, it took them 2 or 3 days to recover.
Yeah, yeah. And there'll be irritability with that. It'll sometimes interrupts your appetite even. You get hungry. It's jet lag. You get jet lag when you have that experience. And some kids are more vulnerable to it than others, especially with kids that tend to be really kinetic kids, high energy kids who already when they get over aroused, their bodies kind of get going. If they haven't had sleep, it gets it worse so, right? So, the number 3 part, let me just, how are we doing for time? What time is it? 5 more minutes? Ooh, okay. The next part is what I call decreasing live oppositional behavior, okay? So this is how to handle that moment where you are asking the child to do something, your kid, and they are not doing it. This is the live and in color moment, right? So let me just kind of quickly go through this to get the idea of it, which is that we want to make sure that we're choosing our requests carefully so that we don't have a jump. We don't have a jump because I heard this guy, Dr. Witt, and he said I'm supposed to have more routines and more expectations, and I'm supposed to do this. So I'm going to go have a big jump, lots of new requests. I try to caution against that. And any time, so sometimes we'll get frustrated and want to throw our hands up and, okay, it's going to be a new system here, and we're going to completely have a new way of doing things, and that often doesn't work too well. So choosing your new requests gradually. And by request, I mean that you're requesting your child to do something new or to try to do something better that they already knew that they should have been doing, right? That we state our request in either declarative statement or choice, which means you say it either like, it's time for your bath, which is a declarative statement, which is true. It is time for your bath. That's what the routine says. Or a choice, which may be something like, would you like to have your toys in your bath, or would you like to go right in? Or would you like to, have me hang out with you for a few minutes or be on your own? These are choices which help the child have some involvement in the request, but they are not necessarily questions like, can you take your bath now? An open-ended question, which is great when you really do care about what the child believes. If you care about, do you like oranges? And you really want to ask them, it's great to have that interaction with your child. But when you say, could you take your bath, or do you want to take your bath now? It's even the culprit in my mind, in terms of that gives then the child too much to process. It's not just that you're being wishy-washy, but they're processing a lot of things. Can I do it now? Well, wait a minute. Do I want to? Well, there's so many things that then get you in a dialogue that's apart from the bath, right? Now, the next part of this, if child is either actively or passively not following through with that request, it's time for your bath now. There'll be a temptation. The temptation is to cycle up, which means to say things like, we have a lot to do this afternoon. There are so many things that you haven't been listening to me about. I need to have you be a better listener. This is all going upward. And by upward, I mean in 2 ways, obviously. More complex, right? You're bringing it into a wider topic, plus sometimes in your voice and tone is going up, right? And so the key is to go downward, not upward. And how we do this is the obvious one is to try and get closer to the child, not farther away, and to try and have your voice in a more even tone. And a friend, a woman who's a mom and psychologist, said a great thing about this, which is sometimes you have to pretend. as a parent. You have to be an actress or an actor. And it doesn't matter if you're mad, but you have to put on for a minute a moment where you say, okay, I'm just going to bring this down. And with that, then to be more specific rather than less specific, which means that instead of repeating, we've got to take your bath because da-da-da-da-da-da-da, we'd say that your toys are going to go over here and it's time to stand up. It's that simple. We break it down into a smaller piece, not a bigger piece, right? And so that the child, it's very clear, it's very specific, it brings it down. And when you do that, your goal is to say to the child, look, this is doable. I'm not asking a lot of you here. And I can do this in steps for a minute, but I want you to go to that next step. And now, here's the key. If they are begrudging, upset, whining, sad, etc., it's best to ignore the attitude. It's best to let it go. Because if what we focus on tends to increase in frequency, if you're focusing on what's going on with them, that's the negative side, it may grow and grow. Now, later on, we can talk about that. But at the moment, when they are starting to have some, let's call it escalation of upset, sadness, anger, etc., to get into that with them wholly, meaning, why are you doing this? You're not respecting me. Even what's going on with you might all be things which tend to increase that side at that moment. So instead, what do? We try and encourage that stepwise behavior. And if they do that behavior, if they've stood up off the couch and they put their toy down, even if they're upset and whining, what do you say? Anybody got any guesses? Good job. Nice work. Thank you. Anything of this sort. Because what you're trying to do is an ABC thing. And A means the antecedent, what comes before the behavior. And that's your prompt. Your prompt was, it's time for your bath, right? That's the A. The B is their behavior. They did a step towards their behavior. What C is consequences. And in this case, we're looking for positive consequences, right? We're looking to attend, you're trying to focus on what went well. So they've got up off the couch. What comes next? Any guesses? Sorry?
Walking to the bathroom.
Yeah, good. Okay, good job. Down the hallway, right? Nice work. And that chaining then goes on. And the idea is that the prompts can then fade. As the child's getting that, oh, it's just as simple as ABC. You said this thing. You followed through with it. I didn't get away with the whining, which was a smokescreen, by the way, right? They did this thing, was to try and kind of get the whole thing into that zone. I mean, sometimes this is hard because sometimes they may really be exhausted, or they may be something that's really bothering them, and you do have to back up. And this is the tough part of that parental reading in terms of when is it hug and when is it push. But we can usually know when, at our home, we used to call this a mouth cry. When a mouth cry happens, which is when your son or daughter cries from their mouth but not from their eyes. You know? Here it comes. This is the thing that's saying, I don't want it, this is bad, I don't like the bad, but there's no real, there's not upset in the eyes. This is, I'd rather play with my toys, is what the mouth cry is saying. Anyway, so then, and the goal here in terms of this is to have that chain going in terms of accomplishments. Now, the last part here, which I think I'm going to leave behind, there's some of it written down here, is about things like reward programs or incentive programs. Oh, a little bit more? Okay. Is reward programs or incentive programs. And you know, we have star charts, we have stickers, we have things that are lots of people try. But just, and I think that there are a few things that I think are good to keep in mind about such things. I like to have it so that these things are not trying to chase down every behavior in your child's life. So we don't have a big list with day after day after day pursuing all the things that you want your child to change. What these are a form of structure. They are a form of structure, which means that you're giving your child some structured feedback on how things are going and what might happen that could be good for them if this works out. And so that it's good to pick relatively simple goals, just a couple of them, right? This is, and that they're very specific. Again, specific, not too general. Things like using polite words with your brother, right? Or what's a good other specific one? Practice your violin, which is my son. These things are relatively discreet. They're not so much. The idea of grace, for example, is an idea that is a constitution idea, right? Back to what I was saying about the general things that we have in our family. But to have that as a behavioral goal on a chart, I don't like so much. I don't like the idea, because then it's unclear to the child, well, how much is it to get the sticker? And then you're almost doing those things that are personal and that are of that constitution nature. You're trying to praise them with stickers. And I feel like it needs to be more specific, more discreet, smaller. And that then we have natural consequences to that, not unnatural consequences. And by unnatural consequences, I mean the Disneyland reward, which is if you have this big chart full and for 2 months of this many times you get to go to Disneyland. And I have a couple of problems with that. The first part is that it is very hard for a child, many children, to hold that in their mind all the time, right? Okay, if I do this well, can I go to Disneyland? And then, of course, if they don't do it 4 out of 5 times, do you say, well, no Disneyland? Right? It doesn't work because then it becomes like a punishment. You're withholding something. And instead, there's a kind of natural consequences. And what I like most of all is if they have done things that allow you to have more time, meaning that they did something more independently, they got this task done, so that now you have more time to do what you need to do, that you will have more time to be able to play with them. You'll have an extra time to be able to spend time doing something that they choose to do. Some of these people talk about the boss reward, which is the time of the day that they get to be the boss. They get to pick what they want to do, right? And you'll have more time to do that with them when things have gone smoothly and the things on their chart have happened. So this is just a kind of summary of how I see the idea about these reward charts or stickers or programs like this. I also don't like the idea that we do a lot of taking away in such programs, so that you're going to start out, there are people who we're going to start out with this, one of them is a jar of marbles, and you're going to take them out every time the child does something wrong. This is the quarter every time you swear kind of model. and that what that's doing is emphasizing the negative behavior. You're really attending to it a lot. And this is sort of my sort of hokey idea about kids, but kids want to be good. They don't want to be bad. You're just trying to give them the opportunity to do that. And by having the focus being on the positive and having that relationship build, having the routine build, that we'll see those negative behaviors fade, right? We see them die out of their own accord. And so that's the goal. So I guess in summary, I have a sort of a quick overview of some of these things. Some of those I realize that may not be applied to your child or your situation or your age group. And I think that a lot of this takes some nuances and some further discussion. I think not, I want to say one last thing, if I still have, that there's a kind of when to ask for help question. And I get this a lot of what are the red flags that we need to go beyond sort of thoughtful parenting, whether it's with your mentor, with your clergy, with your psychologist, with your pediatrician, whomever. And I think the 3 things that I really want to emphasize about that is that if there are developmental issues that fall out of a developmentally normative phase, so that if you have your 8-year-old who is suddenly peeing in their bed and when they weren't before, that is an out-of-phase developmental problem, right? It is something that you need to note and ask somebody about. You know, if you're unclear about it, if for whatever reason, that may be a sign of something that you need to have attended to, right? I choose that because relatively recently it happened that a child was sent to me by a pediatrician, and there was nothing emotionally up with that child whatsoever. And I said to the pediatrician, "Are you sure this isn't a physical problem?" And sure enough, there was a kind of infection that wasn't the usual infection that happens when kids have bladder infection. So the idea is that sometimes we may need to ask upward for help. The second one is chronic problems in task completion that are specific to one area. So if a child is having a really hard time with writing skills, or a really hard time with some aspect of sleep, that one area of their life is so hard to master, that's a good time to ask for help. And of course, the last part is if your child is talking a lot about being lonely or not having friends, that they can be angry with you, and you can tolerate a lot better. And they can tolerate, even if you're angry with them sometimes, than if they don't have friends. That's a bigger issue. And you need to, I think, always then start to ask, well, what might be happening? Who can I talk to about that? Okay? All right. I think that's a good place to stop.
So much.
Yeah.